My colleague and friend Shireen Razak, the author of a very good book, a number of very good books, one in particular called Casting Out the Eviction of Muslims from Western Law and Politics, identified at the time of her book launch. She asked a very interesting question. Exactly how many times does Barack Obama need to deny that he is a Muslim? In other words, Barack Obama has also been complicit in this process. Barack Obama is prepared to say very clearly, I'm a Christian American. I'm the kind of American you can recognize. Yes, my middle name is Hussein, but I'm not going to make a big deal out of that. That's a background issue. That's a history issue. That's my paternity. That's my background, you know, in terms of my father's life. But I myself am a Christian, and I know that you have a problem with this Muslim thing. So this is reconfiguring racism. It's changing the kind of racism. It's making it a little more complicated. It means we have to study it a bit more. But it isn't eliminating racism. It isn't changing it with just the election of one man in the White House. So, you know, in a certain sense, this is compatible with Samuel Huntington's Clash of Civilization notion that frames cultures as races and means that we can think we're post-racist when we're actually continuing to carry on racism. That was George Bush's America. What about empire and war? This is an unpleasant picture. This is a picture that comes from the war in Iraq. At the root of the instability is something that I think, however, is much more profound than the question of race or racism. It's not unrelated to it, but there's a structural background to it. There's a reason why these ideas seem to make sense to us, even when they're ideas that we find abhorrent, ideas that we hate, ideas that we would like to overcome. And at the root of this instability is a structural issue going on with U.S. foreign policy that I think has provoked a sense at the highest echelons of the American empire that something has to change. Not the whole thing, not the whole, you know, operation of American imperialism or empire, not at all, but there needs to be some type of a course correction. So this is marked by the failure of the goals associated with the war in Iraq principally, and also relatedly to the war in Afghanistan and the collapse of what was referred to as the Bush Doctrine associated with the post-9/11 grand strategy. And this was associated with an ideological think tank called the Project for the New American Century, or PNAC, that was closely tied to the individuals and to the politics that governed George Bush's America. And arguably, the center of this was George Bush's war on Iraq. Now, this is expressed most clearly, the need to change this, with the advent of a document that was referred to as the Iraq Study Group. It was a sort of commissioned think tank that came from the United States in 2006. And the war was supposed to be a stepping stone to a kind of post-Cold War new configuration of U.S. global power, challenging, people might remember, the axis of evil, the notion of a combination of states which, you know, would be militarily occupied, would be subordinated to the growth of the United States as the superpower on a world scale. And the ideological doctrine was supposed to mean, at the end of the Cold War, where there was a competition between two empires, the American Empire and the Russian Soviet Union. The Soviet Union, I think, was misnamed the communist states, and I think America was misnamed the world, you know, the representative of world democracy. I think, you know, the United States is not the kind of democracy that we would like to see, and I don't think the Soviet Union was actually socialist, but state capitalist. But nonetheless, that kind of Cold War mentality, it certainly dominated my training as a political scientist. It was part of a whole generational thinking, came to an end, and the United States was nervous about making sure that what came in its place was going to be the dominance of the United States and not a reconfiguration of other states. But things weren't going that well. Here's the front cover of The Economist at the time of the Abu Ghraib torture symbols. It's a very horrible picture, but it says "Resign, Rumsfeld, resign." And Rumsfeld was closely associated with the Project for New American Century and with George Bush's politics. The larger problem was that the whole purpose of the war, I mean, originally the war in Afghanistan was to find the Al-Qaeda leader, Osama bin Laden. That is still obviously an evasive goal. The war in Iraq was supposed to be about weapons of mass destruction. There were none, are none. So, you know, there are various theories. I don't want to get into the detail, but that, you know, the United States was trying to manufacture an artificial reason for this war. I actually don't see that. I think it was American imperialism finds reasons. America needed oil. America needs to expand in order to be able to continue its position of global dominance. But there was a problem. So let's consider for a moment the strategy that failed. This is a quote from the strategic document that was published in the United States in the period after September 11th in 2002. And it was strongly influenced by the Project for a New American Century, the National Security Strategy. And it basically summarizes the worldview that I think was quite, for a period of time, it was quite uniform in the American elite. Today, the United States enjoys a position of unparalleled military strength and great economic and political influence. We are attentive to the possible renewal of old patterns of great power competition. Several potential great powers are now in the midst of internal transition, most importantly, Russia, India, and China. In all these cases, recent developments have encouraged our hope that a truly global consensus about basic principles is slowly taking shape. But there was also a sense of urgency. So it goes on. The unparalleled strength of the United States Armed Forces and their forward presence have maintained the peace in some of the world's most strategically vital regions. However, the threats and enemies we must confront have changed, and so must our forces. A military structured to deter massive Cold War-era armies must be transformed to focus more on how an adversary might fight rather than where and when a war might occur. So the Bush Doctrine became this kind of go it alone, preemptive strike notion that America was going to prove its overwhelming global dominance through its military might, without allies, regardless of support. And the Bush Doctrine was associated, here's another quote from the same document, while the United States will constantly strive to enlist the support of the international community, we will not hesitate to act alone, if necessary, to exercise our right to self-defense by acting preemptively. So the notion is, you see an enemy, other people don't believe it's an enemy, you know it's an enemy anyway, you don't have any evidence that it's an enemy, you don't have any documents or proof in international law, but you have to stop it before it gets started, because the risk otherwise is that multiple forces, who are your strategic competitors, could move into those regions. And that particularly had to do with oil-rich reasons, such as Iraq, and Afghanistan is very close to the Caspian Sea, which is a new source of global oil. So the release of the Iraq Study Group document on December 6, 2006 was a reversal of this plan. This was published by a bipartisan team, James Baker and Lee Hamilton, and it was widely seen as something that was to try to rein in the Bush regime. And the principal conclusion of it, and again I'll read a quote, the situation in Iraq is grave and deteriorating. In this report, we make a number of recommendations for action to be taken in Iraq, the United States, and the region. And our most important recommendations call for new and enhanced diplomatic and political efforts in Iraq and the region, and a change in the primary mission of U.S. forces in Iraq that will enable the United States to begin to move its combat forces out of Iraq responsibly. So if you remember back when I was talking about sort of, the only difference that we could really see between McCain and Obama was the war in Iraq, this I think is significant in terms of this overarching shift that was starting to take place in American elite opinion. American intellectuals were feeling like, we've got a problem. The Project for a New American Century, the notion of a light footprint that's going to expand and accelerate American interests, it's not working. We're losing credibility. We've got, problems of corruption. We've got problems of torture. Enter Barack Obama, who plays the role, who fits the bill, who seems to be a candidate who can move towards this new type of a hegemonic bloc.